Shalom. I told you I was going to put together some information on rights of indigenous people, so I came across several PDFs. One is called American Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, adopted at the third plenary session held on June 15, 2016. Let me see. One is called Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. This was 1994. Federal enforced pursuant to Article 6 of the Constitution for the United States of America Republic. And then the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Independence. United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. And this was adopted by General Assembly Resolution 61/295 on 13th of September 2007. Then I was skimming over it, and I saw one that had a term colonize, so I put up a couple definitions on colonize, and then of course I pulled up the definition of what is an American from the original sense. From the Webster's Dictionary 1828. Of course, you can also look up the etymology definition. You can go online on the etymology dictionary, look up America and American on there as well. So, I will begin the longer one. This is page 1, American Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. The General Assembly, recalling the contents of Resolution AG/RES 2867. This may be several videos. Draft American Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, as well as all the previous resolutions on this issue. Recalling also the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People in the Americas, document AG/DEC 79, and then goes on, which reaffirms that progress in promoting and effectively protecting the rights of indigenous people of the Americas is a priority for the Organization of American States. Recognizing the valuable support provided by the member states, observer states, the organs, agencies, and entities of the Organization of American States for the process within the working group to prepare the draft American Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, recognizing as well the important participation of indigenous people of the Americas in the process for preparing this declaration, and taking into account the significant contribution that the indigenous people of Americas have made to humanity, resolves to adopt the following draft American Declarations on the Rights of Indigenous People. 1. The United States remains committed to addressing the urgent issue of concern to indigenous peoples across Americas, including combating societal discrimination against the indigenous people. And 2. Canada reiterates its commitment to a renewed relationship with its indigenous people based on recognition of rights, respect, cooperation, and partnership. Canada is now fully engaged Let's see. Page 2 came up blank, so I'm going to have to see what that said. I don't know if it was a mishap or something. I don't know what happened to page 2. But we'll go to page 3, and I'll try to get back to page 2. American Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, Preamble. The member state of the Organization of American States, hereafter the states, recognizing that the rights of indigenous people are both essential and historic significance to the present and future of the Americas. The important presence in the Americas of indigenous peoples and their immense contribution to development, plurality, and cultural diversity, and reiterating our commitment to their economic and social well-being, as well as obligation to respect their rights and cultural identity, and that the existence of indigenous cultures and peoples of the Americas is important to humanity, and reaffirming that indigenous people are original, diverse societies with their own identities that form an integral part of the Americas. Concerned that indigenous people have suffered from historic injustice as a result of inter alia, their colonization. There you go, colonization. So before I get sidetracked, let me see what this colonizing is, what colonizing says. I'll just use a few. This is a definition of colonize in English. It says send settlers to a place and establish political control over it. Then it says the Greeks colonized Sicily and southern Italy. That's the example. 1.1 settle among and establish control over the indigenous people of an area. In the definition, they sought to discredit the peoples they were colonizing. An organization seeking to protect the rights of the newly colonized. Let's see here. And here's another one. Let's see. Of a country or its citizens, and send a group of settlers to a place and establish political control over it. Occupy, take over, seize, capture. Come to settle among and establish political control over the indigenous people of an area. Appropriate a place or domain for one's own use. Okay. Then while I'm at it, of course you already know about this one. Webster's Dictionary 1828, American adjective pertaining to America, American noun, a native of America, originally applied to the Aboriginals or the copper-colored races found here by the Europeans, but now applied to the descendants of Europeans born in America. Okay. You can find all of this online. This is for educational purpose, all right reserved. Looking at the time. I lost my place. I'll just start over again. The rights of indigenous people are both essential of an historic significance to the present and future of Americas. And I'm trying to find the important presence in the Americas of indigenous people and their immense contributions to the development, plurality, and cultural diversity, and reiterating of commitment to their economic and social well-being, as well as obligations to respect their rights and cultural identity, and that the existence of indigenous cultures and people of the Americas is important to humanity, and reaffirming that indigenous people are original, diverse societies with their own identities that form an integral part of the Americas. Concerned that the indigenous people have suffered from historic injustice as a result of inter alia, their colonization and disposition of their lands, territories, and resources, thus preventing them from exercising, in particular, their right to develop in accordance with their own needs and interests. Recognizing the urgent need to respect and promote the inherent rights of indigenous people, which derive from their political, economic, and social structures, and from their cultures, spiritual traditions, histories, and philosophies, especially their right to their lands, territories, and resources. Recognizing further that respect for indigenous knowledge, cultures, and traditional practices contribute to sustainable and equitable development and proper management of the environment, bearing in mind the process achieved at the international level in recognizing the rights of indigenous peoples, especially the 169, I believe that's ILO Convention, and the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. Bearing in mind also the progress made in nations of the Americas at the constitutional, legislative, and jurisprudential levels to safeguard, promote, and protect the rights of indigenous people, as well as the political will of states to continue their progress towards recognition of the rights of indigenous peoples in the Americas. Recalling the commitments undertaken by the member states to guarantee, promote, and protect the rights and institutions of indigenous peoples, including those undertaken at the 3rd and 4th summits of the Americas. Recalling as well the university inseparability and interdependence of human rights recognized under an international law. Convinced that recognition of the rights of indigenous people in this declaration will foster among states and indigenous people harmonious and cooperative relation based on the principle of justice, democracy, respect for human rights, and non-discrimination and good faith. Considering the importance of eliminating all forms of discrimination that may affect indigenous people and taking into account the responsibility of states to combat them. Encouraging states to respect and comply with and effectively implement all their obligations as they apply to indigenous people under international instruments, in particular those related to human rights, in consultation and cooperation with the peoples concerned. Declare. Section 1. Indigenous People. Scope of application. Article 1. 1. The American Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples applies to the indigenous peoples of the Americas. We just read what American is. 2. Self-identification as indigenous peoples will be a fundamental criteria for determining to whom the declaration applies. The states shall respect the rights of such self-identification as indigenous individually or collectively, in keeping with practices and institutions of each indigenous people. So that's why I made my own allodial identification. And those banks and whatever people that are trying to, they're in violation. Because I have the right to use my own self-identification card. So I should better use my own self-identification card to cash checks or whatever I need to do. It's right here. Let's see. Article 2. The states recognize and respect the multicultural and multilingual character of the indigenous people who are an integral part of their societies. Article 3. Indigenous people have the right to self-determination. By virtue of that right, they freely determine their political status and freely pursue their economic, social, and cultural development. Article 4. Nothing in this declaration may be interpreted as implying for any state, people, group, or persons any right to engage in any activity or to perform any act contrary to the Charter of the Organization of American States and the Charter of the United Nations, are construed as authorizing or encouraging any action which would dismember or impair totally or in part the territorial integrity or political unity of the sovereign and independent states. Part 1.